talk about a lot of Second Amendment. We're going to bring you some stuff on Amy McGrath and, talking about integrity and those kind of things. Super important whenever you're dealing with any kind of political race and trying to learn, when to actually vote for a candidate, when not, especially if you're doing your research and things like that. So anyhow, guys, we just hit the 9 o'clock hour. So if you give us just a second, we've got a new little intro here for you. We'll be right back on the Operation Liberty Show. So, welcome, guys. My name is Josh Weah. Thanks so much for joining us here. If you join us on YouTube, Periscope, or Facebook, we appreciate every single one of you in our attempt to put as much information out as what we can about my good friend Wesley Morgan, a former state representative here in Kentucky, who will be running against Mitch McConnell in the upcoming 2020 Republican primary here in Kentucky for the Senate position. So, Mr. Morgan, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back. I know we had some problems last Sunday, I believe, and couldn't do the show. Basically, some technical problems, I think, where we wasn't prepared to do this new format. So I apologize to the audience for missing last Sunday, but there really wasn't much we could do.
Yep. And then, of course, our guest tonight is Mr. Shane Morris, and he is retired military. He's a teacher, and I don't know. You can explain this a little bit more. I don't want to say a part-time columnist, but we'll just say columnist because I'll be honest with you, that's impressive enough in its own right. If you look at me, it's like every time I write, it looks like a first grader whenever you read it. So I'm certain that you're quite a bit better at that. So if you want to talk a little bit about your experience and your background, we'd certainly love to hear it.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate Wes having me on. I'm a retired soldier. Spent the last third of my career as a CID agent, and I'm also a retired high school teacher. Taught U.S. history. Last 5 years, I was a JROTC instructor. And then my columns are with the Richmond Register, the Berea Citizen, and the Jackson County Times. Notes to Consider is the title of the column.
Okay. So I'm sure that we are, based on that background, I know that we're going to get into some Second Amendment talks. I know that you brought a couple things on, when we talk about integrity and some of those things. I know that you've got a couple audio clips that you kind of want to talk about there. And of course, I would always like to hear you, having taught U.S. history, just to get some ideas of how you stand from a constitutional basis. Obviously, you've been around long enough to be able to hear kind of where Wes's stance are on a couple things and how that lines up with where you think that our current government situation needs to be. LaVon Dixon, thanks for coming on, hanging out with us. Wanda Adams, always good to see you as well. Guys, if you have questions or anything, make sure you get those things posted in the comments so that we can see those things, and then we want to come back and answer those questions. This is a Q&A type of format, and we want to have as much information as far as discussion goes with Shane and Representative Morgan, but this time is for you as well. So make sure when you post those questions, we'll circle back around them as quickly as possible in order to start getting some of those things put into place, okay? So, Wes, I've been talking a little bit. I know you've been sharing some stuff out to make sure that we were going through there. So how's the campaign going? Tell us a little bit about what's going on.
The campaign's going good. We're making progress every single day. Since we were on last, we spoke to the GOP ladies, Davies County GOP ladies in Owensboro, and Dave Clark was with me. We went there, and we had a meet and greet over at Barbara Knott's house in Owensboro, and had a great reception with a group of people. We are actually, I've been doing a lot of research this past week, researching Mitch McConnell's voting record in D.C., and I'm at 17 pages. And still got a lot to go. I'm only to 2014, and believe me, when I'm finished with it, I'm going to post it because people are going to be shocked what this man has voted for in the time that he's been our United States Senator. Now, or tomorrow night, actually, September 23rd, we will be at the Nelson County GOP it's at the public library there in Bardstown. We'll be there tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. We'd like to invite anybody who'd like to come out and listen to what we got to say. To please come on out and listen.
Perfect. Well, we'll get into the kind of the topics of tonight, and I know we're going to do some Second Amendment talks to start with, and of course, I'd also like to get Shane's feedback a little bit again with his background in U.S. history, talking about maybe some of the things that he sees that maybe liberties that are being attacked a little bit more now based on societal things as opposed to maybe what's been seen in the past. I'd be curious to your opinion on that. And of course, I think there's a lot of people that would love to know Wes's stance on a couple of those types of things as well. So you guys pick a spot where you want to get started.
Well, let me make a comment here. First thing I'd like to say is please, everyone who is watching, please share this out on your phone. Notify people. The more this gets out, the more people know what we're standing for, what our issues are, and it's all about we the people, of course, and it's not about any individual. It's not about Wesley Morgan. That's not about it at all. In fact, I've told you before that if when I go to Washington D.C., I'll be 70 years old. And that is not something that a lot of people want to do at 70, and I really don't particularly like it myself, other than the fact that I will sacrifice to bring our government back in control. And we have people that's absolutely not paying any attention to the Constitution whatsoever. In fact, I could make the case that most of them up there could be indicted for a violation of their oath of office. There's no doubt about it. They have violated their oath of office when you look at the Constitution and what it means, and you look at the things that Mitch McConnell's voted for, like the Patriot Act and allowing surveillance of American citizens, all in contrary to the Fourth Amendment. And they have just taken the Fourth Amendment, just tore it up and threw it away. In fact, I don't know of any amendment to the Constitution that Mitch McConnell is for. I don't know of any one that he hasn't violated. This man has done nothing but try to gain as much power as he can gain and get as wealthy as he can get. And he could care less about the people of Kentucky. Oh, I know he's doing a lot of things right now. It's coming up on an election. And he's bringing a lot of money in, building fire stations in Somerset, and building some bridges and bringing in money to Owensboro and some of Paducah and some of these places. So he's just trying to buy votes. That's all he's trying to do. And the very moment that he would be reelected, I can tell you that his modus operandi will not change one bit. He'll be doing the same thing that he's done for the past 35 years, and that is take care of Mitch, his power, and his money.
Well, and there's a you want to talk about getting into a hornet's nest with everything, all the cans of worms you just opened, because there's a bunch of them. There's a bunch of them right there.
That's absolutely true. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm telling you that when you go take any kind of public office, or whether you go become an employee of the federal government or whatever, you always take an oath. Every judge has to do that too. Every state representative, every state official takes an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States from both foreign and domestic people that would show it harm. And they're not following it. There's no doubt about it. There is no way that what has happened to us in the last 40, 50 years, they have just basically just wadded the Constitution up and thrown it in the trash can. And I know people, because if they don't pay attention enough to really know what's happened to them, and your rights are being eroded every day. It goes back to the old analogy of the frog that you put in the water on the stove. If you put the frog, if you throw him in the hot water, he jumps out because he knows what's happening. But if you take and put him in that pan with the water and you turn up the heat, he'll sit there and boil to death because you're bringing the heat up on him a little bit at a time, and that's exactly what they've done to us. And I'm telling you what, you have a lot of people that in Washington D.C. right now that is not loyal to the United States of America. They're loyal to the United Nations, to the globalist system. That's what they're loyal to, and not me. And I can tell you right now, like I said, when I go to Washington, I will go up there and I will stick a wrench in the cog of the wheels and I will stop it dead as many times as I can until the people, and they will see that we will be in the news every day about what we've done next. That I will defend the common people, the way I was raised. I was raised in the coal fields of Eastern Kentucky. Nobody gave us anything. We didn't want anything. And, right now they're talking about, you take $4.5 billion and send it down there to take care of these illegal aliens that's coming in. But yet, you got people that are starving to death in this country that no one's taking care of, especially homeless veterans that has literally went and fought for this country. I just find it appalling. It moves me. It moves me to the point that I'm actually out here running against one of the most powerful money person in the whole United States of America, and Mitch McConnell. And you know what? He spent 35 years building that up, and I know he did. And he thought everyone that's tried, any constitutionalist that tries to go to Washington D.C., they spend tons and tons of money. Now let me tell you right now, without a doubt, when he lets loose all the money on me, it is untelling what they're going to start telling on me, what they're going to start saying I done or I did or whatever. And they'll go back, they'll try to find something 50 years ago or 40 years ago or 30. It don't matter how long ago it was. So, it's just a matter of time till my name will be slandered from one end of this state to the other, because it is his modus operandi. That is the way he operates. That's what he did to Judge Moore. That's what he in Alabama. That's what he did to Chris McDaniel in Mississippi, and that's what he did to Don Blankenship in West Virginia. So I know what's coming. I have no question about it. I know what it is. But I asked Shane to come on because I've known Shane for quite a while. Patriot, there's no question about it. A patriot. And his interest, he actually wrote some articles or did some news concerning Amy McGrath and how Amy McGrath portrayed herself to be a fighter pilot when in fact she was sitting in the back seat. I have nothing against the person sitting in the back seat. And she served, and I'm not taking anything away from her at all from being a Marine, but you should tell the truth. And I think, Shane, if I'm not mistaken, if you would kind of tell us about that and tell us how it kind of ended up. I think you said earlier when we were discussing this that she finally admitted it in October of 2018.
Yes, 18th of October, 2018 edition of the Herald Leader. She, for the first time, acknowledged that all of the 85 combat missions that were featured so prominently in her ads were all as a weapons systems officer in the backseat of an FA-18 Delta model fighter jet. And as Wes said, there's nothing at all to be diminished for having served in that position. But I, at least, and I have a sneaking suspicion a lot of other Kentuckians, when they saw those very slick Soros-funded ads that I would argue politicize the Kentucky Aviation Museum and using their equipment, etc., I took her at her word that she was chomping a cigar and swooping in on the Taliban. And the first time that I got an inkling that something was up was a Google image search will not reveal a single photograph of an FA-18 Delta model stenciled with her name outside the pilot seat. Well, I'm an old Army ground guy, but I've been around enough pilots to know that such a photograph is one of their most prized possessions. And so that began my investigation and digging into her service records. There is a retired Army full bird colonel who lives in Berea, who was one of the first that I called up and posed this question to. I said, what can you tell me about Amy McGrath? And this retired field grade officer said, I can tell you she's not telling the truth about what she did in service with the Marine Corps. And it's a real question of integrity. There is some tape here that I can play, and I'll sort of set it up for you. She was being interviewed soon after it was announced she was going to be inducted into the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame. And in the introduction, the interviewer clearly, I'll let you listen to it for yourself, states that she was the first Marine combat fighter pilot. Now, just as in our introduction, you mentioned I was a teacher. I'm a retired teacher, and I made sure to clarify that with you. And you'll hear here that she makes no such effort to clarify what her record was. And for service members, that's very important. This full bird colonel I've mentioned, the best take I've heard on McGrath and the state of her service record was from this gentleman who said, you can take truths and arrange them in a way to make a lie. And so I'll let you listen to this here. It takes about a couple minutes. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Mark Haney. Coming up on today's show, we'll learn about the Findlay Kitchen, 8,000 square feet of kitchen space and equipment for food entrepreneurs of all levels. But first, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath knew from a young age that she wanted to be a fighter pilot. But at that time, the military prohibited women from flying in combat. Still, she eventually joined the military, and in 1993, her first year at the Naval Academy, the restriction was lifted. Her path to becoming a fighter pilot started in 1999 as a weapons systems officer in the FA-18 Hornet fighter aircraft. Her ultimate goal was realized in 2005 when she transitioned to pilot and became the first woman to fly the FA-18 in combat for the Marine Corps. The Kenton County native was recently inducted into the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame, and she joins us this afternoon to tell us more about her career as a fighter pilot, along with Marty Shadler from the Aviation Museum of Kentucky and Hall of Fame. And you can join the conversation at 513-419-7100, email talk@wvxu.org, or find us on Facebook or Twitter. And Colonel McGrath and Marty, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show, Mark.
Congratulations, Colonel. How does it feel to be inducted into the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame?
Well, I'm very humbled by the whole.
So ample opportunity there.
Oh, sure.
She comes on air, and like I said, anyone's ever been interviewed on the radio, you know how it is. You're listening to the show. They just don't call you up cold. You're listening to the intro there, and she lets this float.
Did she ever clarify?
Well, the closest she's ever came to coming clean, if you will, was that Herald Leader piece on the 18th of October of 18, in which she says that she was never a pilot in combat. And she claims that she was always clear about that. I would take the position that by describing yourself as having flew missions, that like I said, I'm an old Army ground guy, but I took her word. I saw her as the pilot of that craft.
Is that any different what John Kerry said he was? What was that Swift boat thing? And
I'm glad you brought that up. There have been I don't know how many comments I've had directed toward me about swift boating. But first and foremost, John Kerry was caught. John Kerry did not spend Christmas in Cambodia in '68, I think it was, he claimed, and several other things that were brought to light by those fellow veterans were never refuted. And so, this it's much like the Russia conspiracy hoax. They won't let it go. They once it's disproven, they continue to treat it as if it happened. Hands up, don't shoot is a demonstrable myth, and yet the left, if you ask someone about it, well, they'll tell you point blank, well, of course that's a fact. Everybody knows it's a fact, and it's not. I think the proof's in the pudding. There's very little has been, at least of the commercials I've seen, this go around for her attempt at the Senate about her military record as compared to when she was running for that congressional seat. I can tell you for a fact that her campaign tried to quash my investigative columns, and to the credit of those editors that ran those pieces, they in essence said, show me where the guy's wrong. And they couldn't. So, like I said, proof's in the pudding. The two other things I've got coming up. One, I've ran in the Jackson County paper, and it will be upcoming in the Madison County papers, is a couple of other questions that arise about her service record. If the question is, was she ever an operational fighter pilot? In other words, did she ever pilot a plane outside of training? I believe there's evidence that she, combat or not, never flew operationally as a pilot. And some may say, well, what's that matter? Well, what it matters is the taxpayers forked out more than $1 million to train her as a front seater. And if the taxpayer never got the benefits of her service as a front seater, was she incompetent? Or was this part of the broader Women Warriors campaign that the Pentagon has been pushing since the early 90s? I would say it's probably the latter. And so in essence, she was sent to a $1 million+ adventure camp on the taxpayer dime. The other question, were the members, the selection committee of the Kentucky Aviation Museum Hall of Fame, did they vote to induct her into that Hall of Fame under the impression that she had ever piloted in combat? And I've made some outreaches to the Aviation Museum, and they've been quite prickly about that, which leads me to further suspect that Shane Morris and maybe some of us sitting before this camera weren't the only ones who had been misled by Lieutenant Colonel retired McGrath about her service record.
Well, I mean, basically, don't you agree that if you're going to lie about something, or if you're going to pretend that you've done something and it not be true, then how in the world could you ever trust that person to ever be in control of your life? And that's basically what these senators are, in control of your life. They make the laws that you have to live by. And this seems to be kind of a widespread issue with the Democrats, to be honest with you, the liberal Democrats. They don't care. And because they have the media under such control, they don't call them out. Now, if I said something that I had done and I didn't do, I can assure you that'd be called out in no time over it. So would most every Republican or every conservative, especially conservatives, because not only would the liberals call us out, but the Rhino Republicans would call us out, because we're a unique group, conservative Republican. We're the ones that the Republicans has got to have to win, but they treat us like a stepchild. I mean, all you have to do is watch the movie Cinderella. I mean, the conservative Republicans are Cinderella. And I can tell them right now, you may treat me bad, and the stepmother may keep me in the attic, and I may not be able to go to the ball, but in the end, I marry the prince, and I go to the castle, and that's where the conservative Republicans are going to go. because we're tired of being dominated by people like Amy McGrath or Mitch McConnell or some of them. And that's the problem. There ain't really that much difference between the two when you get to Washington. They're big buddies and stuff, but I didn't mean to cut you off there, Shane.
No,
I just kept rolling, but I just wanted to make the point that if you'd lie about that, you'd lie about anything.
yeah, it's all about integrity. It has nothing to do with her impugning her.
It'd be like a United States Secret Service agent telling you that he went on the president's protection detail when in fact he spent his whole career in an office somewhere chasing down bad credit cards and U.S. government checks. Mm-hmm. He's a Secret Service agent, yes, but he didn't protect the government. I mean, not protect the president. That would make it a lie. So if he's going to stand there and act like if he did that when it was not true, then what else would he do? What else would he portray to be?
I was surprised when I did my research of McGrath at looking at publications throughout the country that you don't necessarily hear about from the national mass media, at what a celebrity she was amongst as I mentioned a while ago, the Soros hardcore left crowd. Mm-hmm. I often wonder what kind of thoughts have gone through their mind after her stumble coming out for the congressional seat. And then it's only gotten worse since she's launched her Senate run.
In my opinion, this is my opinion, I believe that if you're willing to sell your soul and your integrity for the highest dollar, that the Soros crowd and the ultra left that's trying to overthrow the United States government, you can go up there and make millions. If I wanted to go to Washington, D.C. and become throw in with the crowd that's trying to overthrow the country, they'd make me a multi-millionaire in no time. But rather than making me a multi-millionaire, they'll probably find me floating in the Potomac River because I will fight them for every ounce of every breath I have. I will never betray my country, ever. So,
well, let's ask this question, Wes, because one of the things that I hear is that because here's the real the challenge amongst what we are talking about here, because McGrath and some people I'm sure will be like, well, it's not really that big of a deal or whatever. But tell me what your feelings are. Is that number one, words are important. The words that you use and the words that you allow other people to use about you are, in fact, important whenever it comes to understanding what somebody is wanting to do or will do because here, well, this all goes back to whenever you say integrity and honesty. What is the difference between the two? That's always the question, right? Well, integrity is, honesty is what you do whenever somebody is watching you. Okay, we're going to be honest, whatever. Integrity is what you're willing to do when nobody is watching you and nobody's watching you. That's integrity. And if you're willing to take those certain little steps to say, okay, I'm willing to tell you those little white lies here, what does that mean that they're going to do that to you and for you? So in the state of Kentucky, what I'm trying to do is bring this back in. Talk to me about how important you feel that is from that.
I mean, let's just be truthful. If I had went along with the cover up of Jeff Hoover, Speaker of the House, for his sexual harassment, I'd still be in the House of Representatives in the state of Kentucky. I made in their eyes, I didn't go along with the agenda, and I wasn't about to. I told them I wouldn't do it.
Okay, so let me stop you, because what I think that we need to dig into is why. Why wouldn't you cover it up? Why did you decide to?
Well, you would if you were willing to just sacrifice your integrity and everything about you in order to go along to get along. And if you go along to get along, then you're going to be one of the gang that gets all the bennies and all that stuff. Gets to pass bills that they want to pass and whatever, and get a lot of money put in your contributions account. that a lot of people that, especially the party goes out and has all these fundraisers and raises millions and millions of dollars. And if you don't go along with the program, then they'll use that money to primary you and beat you in the primary. That's what they do. I mean, I can tell you without a fact that the Republican Party didn't care where Deanna Fraser won or not. They just wanted me out. Yep. And Deanna Fraser just got lucky and won by 24 votes only because President Trump came to Richmond, Kentucky, and they ended up having, because of President Trump, there was 14,000 straight poll Republicans. That's never happened before. Never happened. But because of President Trump, it did happen. So the party was really willing to put Morgan Eves in as the state representative from District 81, a liberal Democrat. They didn't care.
Well, so let's talk. Let's talk a little bit about, because I want to hear Shane's point of view from an experience standpoint, because I think this is a good conversation that you can elaborate on some of your things, Wes. Is that, Shane, if you have somebody that from a historical standpoint let me backtrack here. What we're talking about is being able to fix the problems in Kentucky where they exist right now, and allowing that to push up from the bottom to help the country as a whole. I mean, first, Wes can only do what he can do for the state of Kentucky here. Where do you see some of those things from an integrity standpoint that may be lacking right now that need to change? And then you guys can kind of have that conversation.
Well, one of the first things that pops into my mind is, and it's discussed from time to time, the issue of term limits. I won't. I'll try to not stray too far.
Sure.
You can keep in mind, the idea of federalism, local politics, state and national.
Sure.
But, I'll say this right here in our home county, there's some things going on that would cause you to believe that certain individuals never heard of P.T. Barnum's axiom that one monkey don't stop no show. In other words, nobody's indispensable. And, when they get used to people getting in the door for them and saying, let me help you, Senator. Would you like this, Senator? What time should we be there, Senator? You can fall for that siren call that you are indispensable. We've gotten along just fine with term limited presidents. I would argue we would get along just swimmingly with term limited members of the House and the Senate. Our founding fathers did not envision professional politicians. I used to, in the study of history, I'm a firm believer that you need to have some sort of filing system to organize your knowledge of American history. And I always use the presidents. They're like constellations in the sky. They're always there. They're always fixed. And if you can attach a couple of big ideas of what went on during their presidencies, say a foreign policy issue and what was the big domestic policy issue, you'll be in pretty good shape stacked up against the average bearer and your knowledge of American history. And so, yes, sir.
How long has it been since you taught school?
I've been retired now 4 years.
Okay. Were they still teaching American history in school while you were there? You were teaching that, right?
Correct. And that's been almost 9-10 years since I was in the classroom teaching U.S. history before they started up a JROTC program, and I was their enlisted guy.
You know if they're still teaching that or not?
I happen to know that the fellow that holds the seat that I previously had he's a heck of a good teacher. He's somewhat on. I think he's still misled a little bit by the left, but I believe he's like Churchill's famous saying, "If you're 20 and have no heart, if you're not a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative in your 30s, 40s, you have no brain. You know, I think he's kind of coming around to that. Much of it is it's the luck of the draw with the individual. The public schools are sadly Democrat indoctrination campuses, whether the teachers realize it or not. And that's the real sad part is so many teachers.
They used Common Core to do that, didn't they?
What's that?
They used Common Core to get to that place.
That, a long list, No Child Left Behind, Common Core, whatever the flavor of the month.
By the way, Mitch McConnell voted for No Child Left Behind. You know that?
Yeah, we were discussing that. And, George W. Bush, he and Ted Kennedy, anytime Ted Kennedy signs on something, that's a clue.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that if you go to your schools and you go back to the basics of education that we used to have back when I went to school, I started grade school in 1956, started in the first grade. I mean, there was certain things that we had to do. In fact, and you don't have to have a Taj Mahal to go to school in. I was in a one-room building with a pot-bellied stove, and we learned just fine. And they taught us, you had to memorize the multiplication tables in third grade, I believe it was. And then in the seventh grade, they taught you Kentucky history, and which was one of the greatest courses I ever took. Yep. I could literally sit there and listen to Tom Sizemore was my teacher at Leslie County High at Leslie County Elementary. And I could literally, while he was doing his lecture, I could see Daniel Boone in my brain, I can imagine it all. And so, I think if you teach Kentucky history, you teach American history, especially the founding of this country and how it got founded, and then you teach the Constitution, I believe you'll see all of that stuff go away with the liberals and stuff, because what they're doing is they're taking and they're making people ignorant, that they don't know what is really their birthright. And being a United States citizen, you have a birthright to be treated the way the Constitution outlines that you are to be treated. And there are certain rights that cannot be taken from you. And if you don't know that, then you don't know they're taking them away from you.
I've always tipped my hat to the left, going back to Dewey over 100 years ago. They understood that the hand that rocks your cradle rules the world, and they've hijacked our education system. And that's a fact. And
hey Josh, we probably ought to take some questions if you got any. We haven't. We're in 37 minutes of the show. Do you have any?
Well, I just started pushing across a few comments that people had on. I've got a couple that are kind of off the cuff here. I think this is a pretty simple one, but this is kind of an interesting thing, because I think that coming up, if you are for liberty and we are for constitutional conservatism, then we have to believe that liberty is the foundational things that we have to fight for, right? So, that with that preface, the Patriot Act violates our rights. How can they justify this? And I would go a second step.
I actually agree with them. I agree with Ed completely. The Patriot Act is taking your rights away from you. They just put the name Patriot to fool you.
Yep. But the question is that do you fight to repeal that? Because what people will say is that, well, it makes us less safe. We'll give them a little bit of privacy. I know that.
It will not. It will not do it. We do not have to eavesdrop on every single email, phone conversation, every communications in this country. We do not have to do that to stay safe. I think that a lot of this stuff has been perpetrated upon us to make us feel like we have to give up our liberty in order to be safe. And, I just feel like,
if you were elected, would you put something in place or try to get with the Freedom Caucus or a few of those guys to say,
I absolutely would be with the Freedom Caucus all the way, and I would be for repealing the Patriot Act. I absolutely.
Okay. I think that's some good nuts, or that's a good chunk that people would want to know about, right?
I have a quote here somewhere that Mitch did about the Patriot. I want you to.
I do. I am kind of curious because I have not been keeping up with this week. As far as I know, that whenever the Senate was coming back, that they were looking at, or as Mitch said, that he was going to take a look at additional gun control efforts. And I would be kind of curious to hear what you
Listen to this. Listen to this. McConnell called the Patriot Act one of the most important and overdue pieces of legislation in a generation, and declared that perhaps it did not go far enough.
That's what McConnell said.
The man who believes in
Act didn't go far enough.
That's what he said. Got the quote.
Oh, that is crazy.
And this is what else he said. Nothing in the Patriot Act extension has ever been found to be unconstitutional.
Okay, well,
I don't know if he could. I don't know if Mitch. Maybe he's too old. I don't know, but maybe he just can't understand the Fourth Amendment. That the people shall be secure in their paper. I agree, David. It don't. I absolutely agree. But in the Fourth Amendment, you should be secure in your paper and your home and your places without unreasonable search and seizure. I mean, I personally think that auditing you, the Internal Revenue Service auditing you, is a violation of the Fourth Amendment.
Well, talking about the IRS, would you work to put a tax system in place where we could abolish the IRS?
There is nothing on the face of this earth that I hate no more than the Internal Revenue Service.
I think that, listen, left, right, or indifferent, I think that everybody can get on board with that.
They are literally stealing the people's money. I mean, let's just talk about just for a second, because I know we've got time, but
yeah, we paid $1 million.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this new tax they're putting on Madison County. Just raising the property tax. Well. And they use, all right, we got to have a new jail. That's what they're using. And if we don't get the new jail, then we may have to turn inmates out on the street. Well, it's just another fear tactic to get your money. Look what they do to you. I mean, you got the federal government taking a large chunk out of your check. Then you got the state. Then you got the county. And then you got the city. And that ain't enough. Then you got to pay fees for everything you do. And then when that's all said and done, you got to pay property tax on the stuff that you bought out of the money left. What's a tax? That they left you a little bit, and when you spend it, they want to tax it.
Listen, everything you buy, you rent now, right? Because if you don't pay your taxes,
there's no such thing, and they don't believe in these liberals and stuff. They don't believe in owning property.
No,
they don't believe it.
That's a whole other conversation for another day. But I think that, in my personal opinion, if you can put a property tax levy on a ballot to vote on, that people who own property should be the only people allowed to vote on it. Because
by the way, I want everyone to know that. I want everyone to know this. That when I first filed to run state representative, what's the first thing that happened to me? I got audited by the state for 4 years.
And
nothing. I mean, this is what they do to people who are going to go up there and stand up for the common person, the working person who is going every week, getting up, being at their job at 8 o'clock in the morning, not getting home to 6. Them and their wife, while their kids get off the school bus and go let themselves into the house, and they take 50% of their check. I mean, and they don't want nobody to stop that. Those people, it's multi-millionaires that live the life of luxury are living off the backs of the working people. They are. And they're just literally just keeping them down. They've almost eliminated the middle class.
Well, talk about that. I'm going to circle back to education here for just 1 second, because Mark Davis put a question in. Would you support eliminating the Department of Education? I'm assuming he means the federal Department of Education.
I was for it when Reagan called for it. I was against it when Carter put it in play. When President Carter once signed that into law, when it did that, it is the federal government does not have the right to be involved in the education of our kids. Absolutely doesn't. That needs to go all the way. I don't even like the state being involved in it. I think it needs to be done completely local, because you can have, you can even have standards, because when you do, that gives them the control.
Yep. I think that inherently, I think that your more liberal areas are going to teach that way, and your more conservative areas are going to be conservative, which is why I actually believe that you don't really even need a two-party system. That's a whole other conversation for another day as well. But
listen, I have nothing against the educational system. I have nothing against the people who teach. They're really good people.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is that the homeschooling kids are scoring higher than the kids going to public school. If that doesn't stop, the public school system will collapse. It's not going to be allowed to go on and on and on. So the best thing to do is fix it now. The teachers want to teach.
Yep.
It's not they don't want to teach. It's they're being restricted by all of the bureaucrats who are making up the rules about teaching.
The testing. The amount of testing that goes on right now to keep teachers accountable. I'm assuming that that's what the purpose is.
Let me ask you a question.
We didn't used to do it, and we were just so much further.
Let me ask you this question. What good does it do to have common goals of education and to teach certain structures if you're making the student dumber?
Well, I think
how does that help?
Jane, do you think that from the time that the time that you were in the classroom, Ted, that the emphasis on critical thinking skills and problem solving has gone? Does it exist anymore?
I'll go back to what's the real purpose of the public schools is indoctrination, talking about the founding of the country and focusing on some bizarre esoteric subjects such as transvestite women of color who were barred from serving in the Continental Army or some baloney like that. That's that's what the emphasis is on, and not the true critical thinking skills that come from having teachers who, if they teach mathematics, they should be trained in mathematics. My favorite professor at Eastern, Walt Oldham, once famously said to me, the College of Education was the kitten that should have been drowned. And Walt was absolutely right. If you teach history, you ought to know history. If you teach mathematics, you ought to know math. And cut out this indoctrination that's going on. As I said a while ago, most of it, sadly, being carried on by teachers who themselves are conservatives, but don't bother to dig and research on their own to understand how they're being manipulated. And I've made a lot of my former colleagues pretty mad when it comes to the discussions about public pensions and the shape that they're in. That's another example. The reason I bring that up, when you saw those marches on Frankfurt and those banners from socialist organizations that were holding up banners, the Louisville Socialist or something like that was one group that was there. These teachers were being herded and manipulated by these forces that have been pushing this indoctrination agenda on the public schools. And sadly,
the KEA was really what the problem was. The KEA, they wasn't worried about the teachers' pension. They was worried about keeping the KEA going. Mm-hmm. They wanted to keep as much control over the teachers as they could. I believe that if we would just do something a little different, that most of the people would probably leave the KEA, because I don't think they like paying those dues.
Well,
I want a fair shake. You just give them a fair shake, and they'll be perfectly fine. I'll ask this question. When did this country get to be not about the individual anymore, but about the state? Because it's as plain as the nose on your face today that the individual means nothing. The state run. I'll give you an example. How come that if you send in your tax payment late, they can charge you a penalty? But if the state is late on giving you your refund, he don't pay you nothing. I mean, that is putting the state above the individual, and I just don't believe in that at all. And I think that's where the real problems are coming. We got to get back to personal liberty. And I'm not saying that you could do anything to hurt someone else, but you got to have a lot more freedom than you got now. You got to go back to what the freedom you had 50, 60 years ago.
I would, I would trace it back to Woodrow Wilson. He and the rest of the progressives in their attacks on the Constitution, calling it a horse and buggy document for a modern age. It didn't fit with the modern age. And, you see that same theme running through the left to this day, that it's a living document. Justice Scalia, he used to greet student groups that were coming to the Supreme Court. If it was his day to greet the student groups, he would greet them with the Constitution, boys and girls, is still very much dead, dead, dead. It is what it is. And it's not this living document. And then, of course, FDR, LBJ, Barack Hussein Obama, it just gets worse and worse.
Well, let me ask you. Let me get back in a couple questions here. I'm going to give you a couple softballs with this because this would make sense, and we're talking about gun legislation, because that's I don't know if they've taken anything up like that or not, but I think they were still working on that. But Robert New, does West support doing away with gun-free zones to allow us to protect ourselves?
Absolutely. No question about it. I think Shane would agree with me. I don't know. See, they're trying to redefine the meaning of. They try to play on this word about the militia in the Second Amendment. Well, let me tell you. Let me tell you about the militia. The militia was that 100 men that lived in Henderson, Kentucky, that Andrew Jackson called upon and told him, said, "I need help to defend New Orleans against the British." That was 100 volunteers, and that was a militia that took their Kentucky long rifles and headed to New Orleans to help defeat the British under the command of Andrew Jackson. And there's a lot of them died. It was no state-controlled anything, and that's what they try to act like, that the militia is really the National Guard, and it is not. A militia is a group of people who live in their homes and that bear their arms so they can be called upon at any time to defend this country, and that's what a militia is.
Exactly. In my lifetime, I'll be 50 this week. No other issue has undermined the left, the Democrat Party, more than the increased respect for the Second Amendment. When I was a kid reading my Pabst American Rifleman, I pretty much had told myself that by the time I reached adulthood, this is probably going to be gone. The Ted Kennedys of the world appeared, they were on the march. And thank God that, we've had some good breaks in recent years. The 2008 Heller decision is unambiguous. It is an individual right. And as Wes was referencing the wording of the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. If you read the primary source documents around the colonial period, one of the big complaints that you come across again and again was that when the militia was called upon, you would have some of these old skinflints showing up with outdated equipment. Regulated, the English language is one of the toughest languages to learn because so many of our words have multiple meanings. And regulated there is not talking about control or regulations in the form of rules and orders and things. It is talking about that you have good, up-to-date equipment and good working order. It's like a well-regulated clock. Or if you've ever regulated the sights, as I once told a lieutenant colonel who tried to be, we were both retired and we're at a ROTC training course, and we were talking about the Second Amendment, and I guess he kind of thought we were still on active duty, and tries to school me about regulated. Well, he was an armor officer, and there's a group of guys there around us, and I said, well, I take it you've never regulated the sights on an M1 Abrams tank. And it gets quiet, and I could see for the first time that he was understanding the true meaning of the Second Amendment. I think there's no other issue that we can have more success and victories than continuing this expansion and respect for our right to protect ourselves.
Let me ask this question. Let me ask this. Now let's think about when this was written. Okay? Could you possibly imagine that anybody in their right mind back in 1786 or 87 or 83 or whatever would actually propose a law that a person was not able to keep a firearm at home, especially the frontier? Kentucky was still the frontier then. Mm-hmm. And, Daniel Boone and them was, when they was crossing the first time when they was trying to come to Kentucky and they were crossing the Cumberland Gap, they got ambushed by a bunch of Indians and killed Boone's son, James. And he had to take and leave that boy laying there dead and then come back later and bury him. But my point being that no one would have thought anything about the private citizen was not allowed to keep and bear arms in order to protect himself and his family. That would have been the craziest thing on the face of this earth.
I used to explain in almost the exact same way that the founding fathers, it was a given that you were going to have a firearm, protect yourself against highwaymen and things like that. The ultimate reason for the Second Amendment is so that we, the people, are armed and the government's armed. And when you have that situation, the peace is kept. And if it becomes necessary to overthrow a tyrannical government, we, unlike those young people in Hong Kong, have the means to do so.
Right.
That's the purpose of the Second Amendment.
And since we've got about 30 seconds left here before we hit the hour, I do want to ask one quick question. Is that, do you feel like that the common citizen should have the same access to the same weapons that the military have access to?
I've always thought that. That's what I thought. I mean, I think you should have the same weapons because it's like Shane just said. The whole point of the whole thing is keeping the weapons in order to put back down an oppressive government. That's the whole thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't. I personally believe in, and I'm an ex-ATF agent. I personally believe that the 1938 Gun Control Act is unconstitutional. I think the 1968 Gun Control Act is unconstitutional. But I will ask Shane this. How in the world does Washington, D.C. get by with you can't even possess a firearm, period, even though the Heller case keeps telling them they got to do it?
Well, it's I'll give you one even closer to home. Last night, I went with my family and some fellow DAV members to welcome back Jim Bryant from McKee on the honor flight that was coming back to the airport. If you go to the Lexington Bluegrass Airfield, you'll see on the sliding doors there at the terminal a very prominent "No firearms past this point" sign. That sign is illegal. That violates KRS 65.870, which clearly says that no government inferior to the state legislature can legislate concerning firearms. Now, you can't carry a firearm past the TSA checkpoint. That's federal property. It gets back in once again to federalism. That sign is not worth the plastic it's printed on. And as long as that thing remains, and as long as they're not called to account on that, all of our rights, as Martin Luther King would have put it, are being threatened. So that's what Washington, D.C. is doing. They're obfuscating, they're dragging their feet. They are depending upon, here in Kentucky, how does Lexington get away with it? Well, as long as Andy Beshear or a stumbo is the attorney general. They just don't get called on it. But, we get someone who respects the Constitution into such a position, then it's a no-brainer. The KRS 65870 makes it a Class A misdemeanor. You can do a year in jail, and you can't use taxpayer dollars as a government official in your defense under KRS 65870 for posting such a sign. In Berea, we had that going on at our city parks. And the mayor at the time, the very far left, Steve Conley, he got called on it, and the signs had to come down. And of course, blood's been running all through the ballparks at Berea since then. It's just been okay corral. No, it's been fine. And,
I need to respond to David Cooper, who says that no, we shouldn't have nuclear weapons. I agree with that.
Let's
I don't think we should possess a nuclear bomb. I do agree with that. And a personal, B-2 bomber ain't too. I'm not too interested in having one of those either. But
I think most constitutional scholars will point. Where do you draw the line? To the key word of bear. Are you able to bear that particular
Keep it on your person.
Correct. And I would, me personally, I think when you get to crew served guns, all right, you can draw a line there. This might be somewhat controversial. Even though I didn't like it, the executive action on bump stocks, I personally don't think that violates the Second Amendment because it is an accessory. It is not the gun, and once again, I don't believe in giving an inch on anything because as soon as you feed the crocodiles thinking that they're going to leave you alone, the rest of the story.
The rest of them. Yeah.
But getting back to, we're talking specifically here, what's the parameters of the Second Amendment? I don't think that was a violation. But there's obviously any sort of quote unquote assault weapons ban would or should not last a second before the courts because, the AR-15 is the issued rifle. And it's clear the Pennsylvania rifle, the Kentucky rifle was state of the art at the time. And, if you take that argument and they say, oh, well, we're not talking about flintlocks, then, does the First Amendment apply to quill pens? Does it cover, word processors and stuff? Of course it does. So those are specious arguments.
well, answer Linda Allen's question there, Shane.
Yeah, she would. I got two questions for you. Do you have to carry?
All I'll say is this.
You have to have a permit. I don't believe in Kentucky you do.
That's once again, I thank you for having me on. I've had a excellent time, and we've not even really waded that deeply into the Second Amendment.
Hours.
Yeah, exactly, and I think it's very worthwhile. I think there's a lot pertaining to the Second Amendment in Kentucky that most Kentuckians don't know about. For example, there is on the desk, speaking of Mr. Beshear, the Attorney General, there is an opinion request that has been there since the 19th of February. And there's a long-standing precedent in the AG's office to take no more than 6 months on any question. We're over that 6-month mark now because the AG doesn't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. The question that was asked of the AG is, on what legal basis are there any public gun-free zones in the Commonwealth of Kentucky? Of course, the answer to that is there are none. Now, there are places that you might have to carry openly, but there is nowhere in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Of course, federal property is different. Private property, Wes and I had an interesting discussion before we went live about what the government can or can't tell you to do on private property, but that's another issue. But let's just say, with the exception of federal or private property, anywhere in public, there's nowhere you can be compelled to be disarmed in the state of Kentucky because Kentucky Bill of Rights, Section 1, Article 7 states clearly the right to bear arms in defense of themselves and the state, subject to the power of the General Assembly to enact laws to prevent persons from carrying concealed weapons. They can't, in KRS 527070, which puts all those ridiculous signs on our schools, They're like a flashing sign to these psychopaths. This is a place to find unarmed people. They had no authority whatsoever in paragraph 1 of that to ban the open carry of firearms by law-abiding citizens on school property. They don't have that authority, and they need to be called on that. When they gave universities blanket authority to regulate firearms on college campuses, they didn't have that authority. You can't birth to one entity a power that you don't possess. And so keep an eye on that. I think that's going to be important. When Kentuckians are made aware of the fact that there is nowhere, if you decide that you want to be armed to protect yourself and your family, just like the politicians. I've been on protection details. I served on the Army Chief of Staff's protection detail in the Middle East. They are protected immaculately by firearms, and you have that same God-given guarantee. There's a reason why Sasha Malia Obama woke this morning to an armed protection detail. It's because it's the most effective means to protect you. And so I think when this fact becomes clear that we're going to see further improvements here in the state of Kentucky concerning protections of your right to bear arms concealed. And I'm a big fan of concealed carry. First time I want a bad guy to know I'm armed is when he sees a muzzle flash.
Well, guys, I know we didn't get super deep into a lot of these things, and maybe Shane, you'll come back on and we can have a conversation a little bit more in depth about some of the things that we're talking about. And hopefully, you guys out there have enjoyed the new format at least a little bit. We'll continue to refine this and through Wesley's campaign into the primary campaign next year against Mitch McConnell. This is your chance to come and ask questions and things, so make sure you take advantage of this every Sunday night at 9 p.m. And we'll be back next week, again at 9 p.m. with the Operation Liberty Show for Kentucky and America. But between here and there, my name's Josh Wheeler.
Let me say that, Shane, that I appreciate very much you coming on and sharing this hour and 10 minutes or 6 minutes with us. That a lot of things that you said has enlightened a lot of us, and I know you know those issues, and I know that you called Amy McGrath out for her deception of the public related to her military. And again, no way am I putting down any of her service. Her service is value to this country, and I appreciate that. But you need to tell what you did and not what you didn't do.
Well, and then as coming up next week, guys, we'll continue our talk about some of the policy points and things. And again, Shane, we'd love to have you back on when we can work it out into the schedule to dive a little bit deeper. Maybe we'll do a special session or something even outside, because there's a lot of people that's interested, especially right now, the hot topic with them trying to take up more gun legislation. And the guy that Wes is trying to replace is the guy who's spearheading a lot of it, at least in the Senate. So, you guys really need to know about that. But guys, again, thanks so much for coming on. For those of you on YouTube or Periscope, this was our first time, so hopefully everything worked out well there. And for everybody, choose your favorite platform next week between YouTube, Facebook, and Periscope. We'll be in all of them at the same time. But until then, we hope that you have a good week, and we'll talk to you guys here soon. We're over and out from Operation Liberty. Talk to you guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.